as I've mentioned a million times, I am trying to gobble up every single kind of self-published or indie content that I can find, and that is how I stumbled on to today's guest on Enter the Poserverse, Frankee White. That Frankie was promoting his former or his previous graphic novel, Broken Bear, on Twitter. And of course, anytime I see someone going, "Oh, you want to read something?" Yes, I'll raise my hand and check it out. And unbeknownst to me, as I've kind of gone on my COVID Kickstarter backing screen, the same Frankee White whose Broken Bear I was reading was the exact same Frankee White whose 20 Fist Kickstarter's project I also was backing. So through a little bit of Twitter back and forth and me being a dumbass in Frankie's direction in the chat, where I was like, "Tell me about your new book." And Frankie's like, "It came out a year ago." And I said, "Oh, I'm clearly bad at this." But once, we kind of laughed through it and he, nodded off my dumbassery, he agreed to let me ask him some questions for the fine folks of YouTube. So please allow me to welcome Frankie into the stream.
When I'm flying in a plane or I'm on the street, there's a lot of famous people that I like to meet. They shake my hand and never ask my name, and they start asking questions that are always the same. Hey.
Hello. How's it going?
All right. Good. Another lovely night here in hot and humid Kansas.
Oh.
All right, so I gave everybody a D- introduction of you from your two works that I've come across. So can you give all of us a brief rundown of who you are inside the world of comics, graphic novels, art, anything like that?
Yeah, so inside the world of comic books, I am exactly what you introduced me as. I have 2 books to my name at this point, full stories. Broken Bear, which was published by Caliber Comics last year. It's a dark fantasy. And then 20 Fists, which was just successfully kickstarted, which is a rough and tumble romance is what I've been calling it. Outside of that, I'm just making my way in. I'm trying to do things how I want to do them, which doesn't allow me to necessarily work in larger groups. I like to do the stories that I want to do, which means I have to self-fund everything.
Fair. What drew you to comics and graphic novels as a medium?
So graphic novels, because I'm a big book reader, I like the monthly format of comics. I actually got back into comics big time when the New 52 came out. So I started reading Batman and fell in love with Scott Snyder and his whole, very prose heavy writing style, which is like the opposite of my writing style, was a big draw for me. So for me, it really was reading the New 52 and then getting sucked in and then realizing, I love comics. I've always loved superhero shows like Justice League, Batman Animated Series, the movies obviously, but I was like, why not take a stab at doing this instead of writing prose or writing poetry like I had done in the past? Why not write comics too? And it honestly has been my main source of writing since. I love it.
Cool. You kind of nodded to things like Snyder and New 52 which drew you in, and I'll probably ask you the same version of this question as we talk about each of your works, but what kind of current stuff do you either read just to kind of go through the comics grind, or what are some, books, titles, publishers, whatever, from comics or literature in general that kind of helps spark your creative muse?
So big one that currently is like a monthly thing is Black Hammer. I devour all of that entire franchise, basically all the spinoffs. I eat that stuff up. A big inspiration, something that I'm always reading, is anything Terry Moore publishes. So Strangers in Paradise, Rachel Rising, his recent stuff, 5 Years. I love his work. 20 Fists is when we get to it. That's inspired a lot by his stuff. And then manga too. I love Gundam. I'm a big mech head, so like Mobile Suit Gundam Thunderbolt is a manga I've been devouring. I'm already 3 volumes into
it. Before we start talking specific works, give me a little taste of you outside of that comics world. What kind of things are you passionate about? What kind of stuff are you the non-creative, writing?
Movies. So prior to COVID starting, I was going to the movies like once a week. We have this thing called AMC A-List. I don't want this to be, oh shit. I don't want this to be like an ad or anything, but we have this thing that allows us to go to like a movie, 3 times a week if you pay X amount of dollars per month. Yeah. So me and my buds and my wife will go like once a week. There's a bar right down the street from the movie theater. So we'll go drink, we'll get dinner, and we'll go see a movie. That really is, I don't want to say my personality outside of comics, but I love movies. That's my big thing.
It's the life I got rid of once we had not 1, not 2, but 3 children. All of that went away.
Beautiful children, I'm sure, but that is one of my big hesitancies for having kids. Is I like to not be. So I have 2 dogs. That's not even comparing them to kids, but that's already a schedule.
Yeah. So let's talk about your first work, Broken Bear, where you indicated that it's a dark fantasy. So what is the inspiration behind Broken Bear, the character of Selm? What kind of was your process for creating that one?
So I had been devouring, and I say devouring because I read like all 5 books of A Song of Ice and Fire in like a couple weeks. They're long. I burned through those, and I was in the mood to write a fantasy because that's one of the few genres that I hadn't been interested in really, like as a writer. And so I originally had kind of broken it down as a short story idea, and I sent out like a little tweet just saying like, hey, are there any artists that are interested in doing this fantasy story? And I got in touch with Adam, who is now like my partner in crime long term. He's so good. And we basically decided to do this sort of like ongoing story that will be told through a variety of different formats. So it's not just going to be like graphic novels. The idea was that we could do shorts, we could do 1-page comics, we could do 1-panel comics, all this stuff. So when you're reading Broken Bear, it's broken up into, I believe it's 5 chapters. The first 2 are actually 2 shorts we did first, and then the following 3 chapters would be like a 3-issue arc essentially.
Sure.
So that was like the idea behind it. We wanted to be able to tell this story of Selm from when she starts in Broken Bear Volume 1 when she's 17 to like very old. It's going to be a long story. Who knows how long it'll take to tell it all.
Nice. In following you on Twitter, you started kind of writing about the kind of characters you like to write about, and Selm is very much in my wheelhouse, right? The journey that she goes on throughout Broken Bear is one of both moral ambiguity, but she's also trying to learn who she is and how she wants to operate under the helm of Broken Bear, or she wants to be, take her own new path. So you kind of said that this is the kind of character that you like to write, and it's something that's definitely evident in 20 Fists as well. So what about those kinds of characters, draws you in?
Well, just frankly, I think they're more interesting. I love characters that can in one moment be good and in one moment do something that's not good. I don't want to say evil, even though Selm has done some evil things. She starts the book doing something very evil.
Yeah.
But it doesn't, that one moment doesn't define her. Everything that she goes through along the journey that will define her by the end of it. And 20 Fists is similar with the characters in there. I don't think even though there might be an antagonist in Billy, I don't think Billy is necessarily an evil person. It's just what she, how she operates in her world essentially. So for me, that really is the draw. I want to have characters that at any moment you aren't necessarily sure what they can be doing next. I want to keep the reader on their toes. And keep myself on my toes as I'm writing it, because I don't even know. I was explaining this to AHG, who's a colorist on Broken Bear. The other day we were talking about writing, and my style is very much like I create the character, and then I maybe have like a very vague outline of the plot, and then I sort of like let them decide like what's going to happen next. Like everything has to be driven by what they do. So Selm opens the book doing something evil, like you said, is that going to define her? We'll see, because the different situation is a different situation. You might do something totally different.
Well, I feel like you don't see a lot of those kinds of characters, right? For some reason, my favorite character, in all things comics has been, Prince Namor, King Namor, the Submariner. And you don't ever hear anybody talk about him being up there, but it's that same kind of like, depending on the day or even the mood or the environment is what, creates that shift. So it's interesting that, is it liberating to not have to have such a cut and dry outline? Like you said, you let the characters make the decision and speak to you. Is that what allows writing to be fun for you and not just like repetitive, going through the motions to write for the sake of writing?
Yeah, and I am not necessarily the best. There's a lot of great comic writers on Twitter, and they'll be talking about how they write every day, and that's not what I do. I'm a bad example of the person that people that say like, "Yo, write every day no matter what," and I just can't. My brain doesn't operate like that. I might sit down and try and write something, but it's not. So what makes it engaging for me is having this journey that I'm essentially going on as I'm writing it. I don't like to do a lot of heavy plotting. And if I am plotting, I'm sort of writing dialogue, as I plot, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm kind of like doing a very, very rough script essentially as I go, so that I can figure out what I want to do with those characters and what those characters want to do. But yeah, it definitely helps to keep it more fun for me than if I said like, all right, here's point A, here's point B. I need to figure out how to get to point B. Like I wouldn't want to write that.
Fair. You mentioned, at the introduction of this portion that you and Adam have a lot of ideas in mind for where to go on Twitter. When you were talking about Broken Bear the other day, you said you've got lots in mind for a volume 2. Can you give us any taste of what Selm's next adventure or moral quandary might be?
Mm-hmm. So we're working on a short right now for Broken Bear, and that is a time jump. So it'll be like 10 years in the future. Selma's much older. She's in a completely different place. And I'm excited about that one. Adam's art in it. He's only on pencils right now, but it's phenomenal. For volume 2, one ends on a cliffhanger, right? Yeah. So we start immediately where we end, and that's a time jump, but it's a actual like temporal time jump in the sense that Selm has now been pushed, hundreds of years into the future. Like if you notice, like in the very end, you'll see like there are little tanks around, and the soldiers are wearing like essentially 1800s military gear. So Selm will be, a fish out of water in this instance again, just like she was in volume 1.
Yeah.
But part of what we want to do is with every volume or every story that we do, we want to try and bring in different genres, bring in different, things to write about and kind of cover. So whereas volume 1 was, I would say, mainly like a dark fantasy with like a little bit of horror, this is much more a horror book. It's a body horror book. It's a Victorian haunted house, Gothic story for most of it.
Cool. I know you also recently tweeted, and what really would have been intelligent of me was to screen cap some of those tweets and be like, you said this.
Please don't. Don't hold me accountable.
I know you tweeted about some frustrations with the publisher of Broken Bear, and without spilling any of the tea, unless you want to, do they control any of the rights that might prevent you from either crowdfunding or doing anything with Broken Bear on your own timeline outside of their control?
So our contract is for 5 years, and we signed it like a year ago. So we're 1 year into a 5-year contract for the first volume of Broken Bear. It doesn't necessarily specify anything about future volumes, but at least for this first volume, we're locked in with that. In terms of crowdfunding and stuff like that, we can crowdfund, but I think future volumes would end up having to be published through them.
Sure.
So we're kind of not really sure what to do next, because since we're making these mostly on our own with, you know, no financial backing, even if we kickstarted it, that would be a very pricey Kickstarter. I mean, just to kind of get, for us to cover just even Adam's rate for, you know, let's say it's 125 pages. That's a lot of money. And then AHG is, you know, his color rate is also, you know, he's got to get paid too.
Yeah.
So just from that angle alone, it's not anything necessarily to do with caliber and what, you know, we want to do going forward. It's just more that we haven't seen yet the kind of backing from a fan base or anything to say like, all right, let's go full steam ahead into volume 2, because we're still sort of doing groundwork for volume 1. We're still trying to get the name out there for volume 1, and we've gotten great reviews. You know, a lot of people that have read it have loved it and everything, but it's more just like getting people to know, you know, who we are as creators, you know, what the book is about, you know, and everything like that before we start jumping into the next one. That said, I do have a lot of it scripted, and I am very excited to finally get to it when we get to it.
Nice. That's exciting. You've talked about Adam and AHG a lot. One of the things that I talked about in my review of Broken Bear is that the way that AHG colored that book blew my fucking mind, from like the, you know, elements of what we expect to see in a traditional glossy, you know, book page, to I loved all of that washed out like watercolor feel where it's like you are almost picking up an old manuscript and looking at early art. So how did you meet both members of the team?
Yeah, so HG's color is amazing. It's like he's like a painter, right? It's not like traditional coloring. It's like he paints over Adam's work, which is beautiful. For Adam, I met them both through Twitter, which is how I meet like everybody, right? Nowadays. So for Adam, I had put out a little call just asking for an artist, and Josh Cruz, who's someone on Twitter that we're mutuals, he had retweeted it, and Adam saw it from him, and so we went from there. And then AHG, we met way down the line, because originally, and this you would know because 25th is black and white, I love black and white comics. If it was up to me, I would do everything in black and white. Unfortunately, they're a very hard sell for an American audience for some reason. Yeah. So we, for the longest time, had planned to do Broken Bear in black and white. And so for Free Comic Book Day, we did release the first chapter of Broken Bear in black and white, just as a fun, like, here you go, it's free, this is the original vision sort of thing. But further down the line, when we got picked up by Caliber, our editor had suggested, hey, just so you know, it's harder to sell books that are black and white, maybe you should get a color. And so we went in and we did another Twitter call, basically, and AHG had saw it, and he submitted his portfolio, which was obviously really good. And then he did a sample page for us, and it was just like, all right, you're the guy. Like Adam was like, that's it, pick him, it's done. Like, he's amazing. Nice. And I was like, yeah, that sounds good.
Nice. So transitioning to your second work, which I finally downloaded my Kickstarter PDF the other day and flew through it. Before we talk about 20 Fists as a title, you said, you know, you like the freedom of writing your own rules and kind of working at your own pace. So is that the kind of freedom that you get from doing something on Kickstarter versus working through a traditional publishing house?
I'll say yes, but only because I've never worked with a traditional publishing house, right? But from what I've heard from other writers and artists, like, I feel like 20 Fists would be a hard sell no matter what. And I know it's a hard sell because I've pitched it to publishers and it has been turned down. The idea of doing a black and white comic is already something that people balk at. And then on top of it, it's an LGBTQ romance, but it's also an action book. It's also a bit of the Warriors. It's, you know, it has no interior dialogue or monologue at all. There's no narration. It's all, if you walked into the bar, if you walked into the fight, what you see and hear would be what's on the page. Mm-hmm. And so that, I think, is, you know, something that many editors would probably say, hey, don't do that. You know, add some interior monologue or something. And some of the early reviews for Volume 1, before they got to see the end, said that. They were like, I wish there was like some interior stuff, but that was one of those things where it's like, I wanted to do something like that, where it's like almost like a movie. I wanted the vibe to be like if you sat down for like an 86-minute, you know, movie real quick. Like you said, you blew through it. That's like the intention. I want you to be able to sit down and read it in one sitting, and then, you know, ideally want to read it again as soon as you do.
Yeah, and that was the sensation you delivered for me, right? I didn't get the one sitting because of little eyes and little hands poking at my computer, but each time I sat down, right, I restarted it to try and read it in the same way that you wanted, and it felt like a cinematic build with the jumps in time, with, you know, the jumps like in different areas where the fighting breaks out. What really drew me to your Kickstarter, especially not having any frame of reference for you as a creator, were the following two taglines in kind of the introduction. A queer, messy action drama about finding who you are and what you want in life in an illegal fistfight league. Dope. And then I think it was right below that, 20 Fists is a 3-chapter black and white comic best described as a queer Romeo and Juliet meets the Warriors. How the hell do you like marry those two kind of philosophically different stories, you know, in terms of elements of the Warriors who are just trying to get home versus, you know, Romeo and Juliet, the love story, and then adding, you know, the notion of queer relationships into it? Like, how did this idea come to you?
So the way we started this project was I had originally written a script for the opening sequence, like the opening chapter, right? The first 19 pages, I believe. And I had no names for any of the characters. They were literally named like No Name 1, Big Jacket 1, and no character descriptions. I just wrote the dialogue and wrote what they were doing and how they were acting and posturing and everything. And when me and Kat teamed up, I said, read this script. Let me know what you think these characters look like based on how they act, how they talk. Who do you like envision these people? Like if you were in like a black box and these people were right outside, how do you mentally picture them? And so she ended up coming up with the character designs based off of how they were talking and interacting. And from there, we sort of built the story even further. Originally, it wasn't supposed to be a romance. It was supposed to be a Western. It was like a Western Warriors. So like that intro. So the intro, right, it plays like a Western. It's the, you know, people walking into the saloon for the brawl, right? Like that was the design. But then once she had created the characters and I saw certain scenes play differently based on how she had designed the characters. Like, for example, Billy and Shell smoking in the back. Originally, you know, if that's, you know, two different characters, it might play totally differently. But for them, when I saw the drawings, I was like, no, there's something there. And I ended up like scrapping a lot of what was already written and redoing it, essentially. All
right.
But,
no, I'm listening because it's like, I'm like, what does this look like as a Western? And then you're like, the bar fight. Check. You know, the I love the bartender with the bill who's like, or the bell. This is the neutral zone. Take it outside. And it's like in every Western, right? I've seen the occasional bartender who will fire the gun into the air to get everybody out. So I'm now going to have to read it another time and just kind of get the Western vibe.
And then the next part, Romeo and Juliet thing. Yeah. Sorry, I was thinking about it just now as you were talking about it. And Romeo and Juliet really is like it's a gang book. It's two warring houses, right? So like that was where I pulled that idea. It's like these warring houses, but set it in a world that's similar to the Warriors without like totally just ripping off the idea of these gangs that roam around. So like the idea, it's like it's a structured fight league. It's not gangs that own territory. Yeah. It's gangs that willingly participate in this incredibly violent fist fight league for no reason
Yeah.
other than they just want to do it.
Fair. No baseball theories showing up.
Yeah, and that was one of the things when we were designing the characters. I was like, do we go full tilt? You know, do we give them crazy costumes like the big jackets? It was, you know, wear big jackets, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you see a little bit later on, when in a later scene when Billy and Shell are at a park, you see these two girls that are dressed like in super 80s clothing dumping a garbage man into a pond, and it's like that's two different crews, right? So one of them, they're the garbage men, and they're just
That's really funny. I like that. The next question I want to ask you is something that I added at the very end, and I know that we may be kindred spirits because you enjoyed the question in the same way, where I was like, oh shit, I've got songs in my head. So for as much as you are a movie person, I just have millions of song lyrics that, you know, I will have not heard a song in a decade and still know it word for word in my head. So one of the things that I asked you in kind of the pre-interview phase was to put together a 5-song playlist that would accompany the ideal reading of 20 Fists. So I'm going to throw that on the screen. And then if you can kind of tell, you know, me or the viewers why you think these songs kind of help share the story vibe of 20 Fists. So maybe, there we go. So there you go. Just justify your playlist.
So all 5 of these songs are some of my favorite songs ever. So partially it's just that I love them a lot. But so Camelot is by a band called Skating Polly. They call themselves Ugly Pop. They're a punk band for lack of a better word. And that song, actually, the lyrics in that song are featured on the last page. Mac is listening to it on her phone, so that's why I put that in there. It's just an angry song, and it vibes perfectly with the fight. The singer has this very like screechy voice, and she just like wails, and it's like the perfect angry vibe. Kiss with a Fist is one of the mantras I had the entire time I was writing it, and it's the original demo version. I'd heard it on MySpace back in like, I don't know, late 2000s or something. It was a long time ago. That song is great. Pizza is the exact opposite of like the first 2 songs. It's a indie K-pop singer named Uyo, and it's this song, and the refrain goes, "Pizza sucks without you." And so it's just this romantic longing song, and I feel like that vibes with Billy's whole mentality the entire time. It's like she has to have Shell, you know, otherwise nothing's gonna be good. Art Arsenal at the Drive-In, again, it's an angry song. It's just such an aggressive song. I thought of it while I was writing the playground fight scene. So like that, imagine that playing, you know, the drums coming in at the beginning, and it's so aggressive. And then from the beginning is the closer. It's Shell on the church. There's a line in it that says, "There might have been things I missed, but don't be unkind. It don't mean I'm blind." And so I think it's like this kind of remorseful song of longing and saying like, look, we made mistakes, but you know, we got to go back to the beginning.
I like your description because, you know, when you say it's a very cinematic read, as you are talking about, you know, connections from the song to the storyline, right? I again am getting kind of the image of that backtrack, or I missed me some At the Drive-In, right? But that's a good kind of hype up song. I think you saw, yeah. I think you saw 2 of mine in the doc that I shared with you. And I didn't put them in a list or in a sequence order because I got lazy. But I liked how we both had Kiss for a Fist, or Kiss with a Fist, but different versions. The other songs that I've got on there, right, that same playground fight scene for me, I get something like Sabotage in the back of my mind working. Yeah, because there's that little build before they just all let out and wail with each other. And then Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting is what popped in my head for the bar.
Yes.
And then the other two, I think, are good kind of summaries of Billy and Shell's relationship throughout the story, where the Stand Atlantic song Hate Me Sometimes is about that kind of conflict between love and hate, right? That every good relationship has a strong source of conflict. And then the Hailstorm song, right, where you at times question the sincerity of the relationship a little bit, right? That is it just from, like, are they really into each other, or is it passion that is lingering from the throes of battle? So I think that's a good kind of lingering thought of, like, if they are separate, is it a question of actually emotionally missing the other person, or is it just the pain and, you know, the other physical elements that came from it? But thank you for sharing that. I that will be in the review that gets posted in the next day or two. That way, as more people continue to get their hands on their Kickstarter or read your tweets about how they can get physical or digital copies, maybe they can vote on whose soundtrack is better. Spoiler alert, it's yours.
I love that question. That was great. I love making playlists for when I'm writing too, so that was like perfect. I've never been asked that before, which is weird.
Nice. Then I'm excited. You talked a little bit about your working relationship with Kat. So can you talk about how you met up with Kat? And while you do that, I'm gonna kind of share a couple of panels from the book with folks in the stream.
So I had worked with her husband, who is also an artist, on my webcomic Wolf on Vacation for a while. And once I was coming up with 25th, I had put out another Twitter, alert saying like, hey, I'm looking for an artist, paid gig. It's going to be this sort of vibe for a book. And she had seen it, and she sent me, saying that she was interested. And from there, it was a perfect working relationship. It was the easiest. I would send in scripts, and then she would just send back, and it was like literally she pulled it straight out of my brain, like exactly what I was thinking. There was very little back and forth about what looks good, what doesn't, stuff like that. It was very much just like she saw the script as it was, and she has like the perfect ability to capture small human emotion, like in movement, in her drawings, which was perfect because, like I said, there's no interior monologues. Yeah. So a lot of what it is you're seeing human gesture to display what they're thinking and feeling, and she's just really good at it.
Yeah, and I'm to let people know who are seeing these, I'm intentionally picking single panels from the front end of the book because I want to know what everybody's reaction is like when you hear like Underground Fight League, right? I got smelly Fight Club style basement in my head. And I don't want to just spoil the sheer scale of how insane the end of the book gets, because it's wild. But I want to stop here on this last image. I couldn't remember where the stretch goal marks were at. So the first question is a question for me. Did we unlock the stretch goal to be able to get the, I think, 4 pages of art and story about Ferris Wheeler?
Yes, so that did get reached. Kat is working on it now. It's going to be separate because it's so wildly different from the actual 25th story. Yeah. It's like a 4-page horror short, basically. It's really weird. I was just like, let's not even put it in the book. We'll release it digitally to all the backers and everything. But we did unlock it. I'm very excited to do that. I'm excited to see what that comes with.
And for people who haven't read it or seen it yet, what's a Ferris Wheeler?
Ferris Wheeler is the mascot for so essentially the pier that they're on in this sequence is Navy Pier in Chicago for all intents and purposes. I call it Aqua Pier in the script. But Ferris Wheeler is the mascot of the giant Ferris wheel on the pier, and he's been there forever.
All right. I'm excited to see a Ferris Wheeler short horror story, because then maybe I'll dial you up and demand, like, you know, no more Broken Bear. I want Forrest Wheeler, the full hardcover omnibus, of everything he's done. So I know that the physical run of books that you produce through a Kickstarter run are limited, as they typically are. That you had said that you had saved some of your reserves for cons, which makes sense. But will you share with everybody what you've tweeted out about how, if they want to get physical or digital books and they weren't a backer, what you would like them to do to be able to get your story?
Yeah, so for right now, since we can't do any cons and I'm only going to have a few left for this run, if you want a copy, all you have to do is donate $15+ to either a Black Lives Matter organization or an LGBTQ plus organization, and then show me the receipt, and then I'll ship out signed copies to you. It's as simple as that. Since this is really limited and it was intended to be a graphic novel, we kind of did this as a fun way to get the story out faster. So this is only a limited run. Like, once these are gone, they're never going to be reprinted. It'll never be reprinted in single issues again. So I'm trying to do a little bit of good with what's left of them.
Yeah, and I think you've picked, two very, very worthy causes, given all of the justifiable, protests we've seen because of all of the recent upticks in violence. And, it's also Pride Month. So I think reaching out to both of those are very, very important, especially some of the organizations that are geared to, like, transgender Black folks. Some of the most marginalized intersectional groups are the ones that need some of the most support. So I think that's a very worthy cause. And, I think you all should jump at this opportunity, because, again, you can help do good. And then you also get, an awesome story that you will regret missing out on, especially if you are a single issue collector like myself. The last question I want to ask about 20 Fists, you kind of mentioned that Black and White comics are difficult to sell through American publishers, which I wholeheartedly agree with. Stories that focus on characters across, the queer identity spectrum are very hard to find in the mainstream. So what are some things that you think that can be done to make it easier to not make publishers want to balk at, a queer Fight Club romance?
Well, I think the first thing is any company, right, is going to listen to the dollar. That's the first thing, right? So if there's any kind of story that you want to see that you don't see enough of, buy it. Don't torrent it. Don't buy it a secondhand copy. Buy it if you can buy it straight from the publisher, do that. If you buy it from a bookstore, that's fine too. Support your local bookstores. That's number one. Number two, I think it's more just like you need to have more queer representation, more Black representation in publishing, in art teams, and everywhere, basically, to make it more common that these stories are being made. Because part of it is that they're just not being made, or if they are, they're getting thrown under the radar because the publisher will hit their quota and do anymore. So really, it's more just like, not flooding the market, but getting more out there and making it more common, so that it's not like a specialty.
Yeah, because I think as I was going through the books that I read or the books that I see in both of my shops, I'm in Lawrence, Kansas, where KU is. Mm-hmm. So it's a fairly progressive area in the midst of a ruby red state. But even if, that being the case, from everything that I can find at either of the shops, the only series that I have found that I can pick up here in town is Tina Horn's Safe Sex, which is all kinds of intersectional issues. So I think, you're seeing like an increase in queer characters in the X-Men, sure, that helps. But I think you're right that, you know, if we want more stories, or I as an educator who try and get kids excited about the nerdy things that I read, they want that like me representation phenomenon. So I think you're right that we as consumers need to help speak with the wallet. So is there a chance, I know that the print run is limited, is there going to be an attempt to put the digital version of 20 Fists up on something like Comixology in the future?
Yeah, so my intention is once this print run is all gone, hopefully soon, then I'll put the digital copy up on Comixology, and then hopefully we can start working towards getting like the actual trade made, which is how I'd like, you know, that's the intended format for it. And then hopefully at that point, the Ferris Wheeler short will be done too. So as like a little bonus, we can tuck that into the trade and everything. Yeah. So that's the plan. But right now, you know, if you want the physical copies, all you got to do is donate and send me a receipt. If you want a digital copy, donate and send me a receipt, and I'll shoot you a link to the PDF. It's as simple as that. And digital copies, they'll never run out. So keep donating. Yeah. There'll be another copy.
Nice. The last thing that I want to ask you before we wrap this up is, do you have any other current projects that you're working on? Please talk about the 2020 version of the 1992 Dream Team of you and Liana working together.
That's only one double-page spread, and that is for the next project that I'm working on, and it's something I wrote. It's called Project Starless Daydreams, and I'm calling it a mech narrative zine. And so my idea was I wanted to tell this story that sort of acts as like the last episode in a mech anime that never existed. So it's a 50-page story with like over 30 different artists, and every artist is getting either like a page or two, basically, where they're either doing a double-page spread, a pinup, sequential pages, character profiles, you know, with stats and all that stuff. Like if you were reading like a video game manual sort of thing. So there's going to be written prose pages, like journal entries and stuff like that. And that I am very excited about. We're a little over halfway done getting the art in and everything. I'm hoping to have it ready to go by the end of this year. And that is also 100% for charity. That's going to go to the Trevor Project. So I'm very excited about that. I hope people like it. It's going to be really weird. It wasn't something that I was comfortable trying to sell because it's very personal to me, the story and the characters that I was telling. So I definitely want to just like put it out there and hope people enjoy it, and we can raise some money and again do some good with a little book.
Nice. I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for sharing very, very awesome works with the world. And is there anything else you would like to say to the folks watching today?
I just want to say thank you for having me on. This was a lot of fun to talk about all my stuff and just chat in general. And to the audience, whoever's watching, be kind or die. My shirt says it.
Very nice.